Well, brethren, here we are, leaving the days of unleavened bread, and now moving further into counting to Pentecost. It is day number 7 of the Omer count. This is the time of the spring barley harvest, of the barley progressing then to the wheat, and the first fruits offering at Pentecost, these maturing crops representing our lives. And as we count from unleavened bread to Pentecost, we count these days, we are reminded of what Moses wrote in Psalm 90, verse 12. It says, "So teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom." We only have limited time. The New Testament says that we are to be redeeming the time because the days are evil. And so we're to be making good use of the time that we have. We are on a journey coming from a place that's not so good to the best possible outcome of God's ultimate promised land, the kingdom of God. We need to go out of Egypt and keep moving. And that's what I want to talk about today, brethren. No matter what happens, we need to continue on this journey with God. We need to keep on keeping on. And the title today is, On This Desert Road, Carry On. We have to keep the spirit of the days of unleavened bread alive. You know, we're to be putting out sin, taking in righteousness. We just had the picture of Israel coming out of the Red Sea, going into the hot desert on their way now to Mount Sinai to receive His law and ultimately going to the promised land. Remember about unleavened bread, we talked about how if the dough remained moist and it was set out, it would become leavened from the air, because we have the prince of the power of the air that is out to devastate us all and to leaven us and to make us like him. He rules this world, brethren. It's a very powerful influence all around. And if we stop, that spiritual yeast all around us will settle on us. God doesn't want that. He wants us to continue onward with Him, sometimes through difficult struggles. After coming up out of the water of new life, God sends His people into the hot oven of the Sinai and all their various trials to help them be unleavened, to be baked, unleavened, all the while feeding them with the unleavened bread from heaven, the manna. It's the same with us. God allows us to go through many trials, sometimes severe, to ultimately strengthen and perfect us as we feed on the spiritual manna from heaven, Jesus Christ. And all that we go through, it isn't just about us either. It may be about others needing to help us. We are all in this together. God's purpose was not just to lead an individual, but a people. He has a community of believers to support one another as a family, His family, to be with Him for all eternity. Most importantly, God helps us, the Father and Jesus Christ. God is the one who delivers us from bondage and leads us to freedom and new life. Why don't you look at Exodus 19? And this is time when they got to Sinai, Exodus 19. In Exodus 19, we'll look at verses 2 through 4. Exodus 19, "For they had departed from Rephidim and come to the wilderness of Sinai," the desert there, "and camped in the wilderness. So Israel camped there before the mountain, and Moses went up to God," verse 3, "and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, Tell the children of Israel," verse 4, "You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." It's pretty amazing. What is this talking about? Let's look over at Deuteronomy 32. Deuteronomy 32, this is a kind of a national anthem for the nation of Israel, kind of goes through some of their difficulties that they went through, and they were to remember this song. And sometimes it's called the Song of Moses. There's the other Song of Moses when they came up out of the Red Sea. They both bear that name. This was a song that Moses wrote under God's inspiration, and they were to remember this song. And it mentions the fact that they are to be remembering in the song. But I want to point out a couple things here. Starting in we'll read verses 9 through 12. It says, "For the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob is the place of his inheritance. He found him in a desert land, and in the wasteland, a howling wilderness. He encircled him. He instructed him, and kept him as the apple of his eye." The apple, that's a word for the pupil. It's like God's right there. We're right there in God's eye. He was watching his people Israel, and of course we are a new Israel. Verse 11, "As an eagle stirs up its nest, hovers over its young, spreading out its wings, taking them up, carrying them on its wings, so the Lord alone led him. And there was no foreign god with him," with Jacob then. It was God they were following. And it's an amazing picture here. An amazing picture of what God did for his people. This thing about bearing them on eagle's wings. I want to read something. This is from a publication from the 1980s titled The Rebirth of America. And this is from the preface by the editor, Nancy DeMoss. She writes, "For thousands of years, the eagle has been admired for its grandeur, its grace in flight, its great size, and awesome power. The soaring eagle is also a stirring picture of the true meaning of liberty. Assisted by his powerful wings, the eagle glides effortlessly to altitudes of over 2,400 feet and is capable of using his wings to carry other eagles to safety. Turbulent winds only cause him to fly higher and faster. The eagle's keen eyesight enables him to be sensitive to approaching danger, to protect himself and his family. The eagle displays the sense of responsibility that is a companion of genuine liberty. He mates for life and returns to the same nest each year, making necessary repairs and additions. He takes an active role in providing for his family and in teaching his young to fly. In so many ways, the eagle illustrates the life, victory, power, and freedom that Jesus Christ came to give those of us who place our faith in him. The eagle also pictures many of those character qualities that have made America great and that must be instilled in our generation if we are to preserve for our children and grandchildren the freedom which God has so graciously entrusted to us." How true that is. Again, this is a really amazing picture which God uses here of himself in his care for his people. It's even more amazing to see how Israel kept botching things. They kept falling down. They kept doing wrong and turning away. Yet God still continued to lead them and guide them and teach them. They even went so far as to worship other gods at times. And God brought various judgments through the wilderness and in later years when they came to the land, but he still wanted a right relationship with them. Let's look down here at verses 36 through 37. It says, "For the Lord will judge his people and have compassion on his servants when he sees that their power is gone and there is no one remaining, bond or free. And he will say, where are their gods, the rock in which they sought refuge?" They're going to pay for many mistakes. They're going to suffer. But God is for them. And God is for us too, brethren. They wouldn't, many of them, enter the promised land. You know, the parents, the older generation, the younger were allowed to enter the land, but the parents didn't. But you know, they weren't aimlessly wandering apart from him through the wilderness. He was always with them in the pillar of cloud and fire. The same pillar of cloud and fire which led them out of Egypt. And we're told that the Lord, Yahweh, here the one who became Jesus Christ, was in the cloud, leading the people. It tells us that over in Exodus 13 and 14. The Lord was in the cloud. And I'll just reference for you Numbers 9. It's an amazing chapter to read, if you read Numbers 9, particularly verses 15 through 23. And it's talking about the fact that this cloud was ever before them. It was always going as, again, a pillar of cloud to give shade and shelter by day and to give light and guidance by night. And it would settle, and that's where they would set up their camp. And they would be there for, it says, sometimes it was just a day or a week or a month, or sometimes it was a couple years. There were a couple years there at Sinai. However long it was, that's where they would stay. And it even says that. It says, however long it was there, they would remain in camp. But when it moved, there would be the signal to go. And the people would rise up, break their camp, and they would follow that cloud. And they kept following and following and following that cloud in which the Lord was. And he dwelt among his people, and he would come down to the tabernacle, and then he would lift off, and he would go, and they would go. And that's how the wilderness wandering was. And that is, it's astounding. You think, how did they drift? How did they go astray when this was happening all the time? But sad to say, they just did not see that. But what's interesting is, if you think about it, those ones that even fell in the wilderness, it's not over for them. They are actually, they're going to be there in the end. I want us to look over at Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11, you had an earlier experience of the patriarchs in Hebrews 11. As we think about the Israelites coming out, they dwelt in Sukkot, temporary booths at first, and then they had these tents that they dwelt in, and it was all temporary. They were on the go. They were camping. They were setting up camp, and then they would go. And should have marked that place. But in Hebrews 11, we're told of even their forefathers, our forefathers. Hebrews 11, verses 8 through 10. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance, and he went out, not knowing where he was going. By faith, he dwelt in the land of promise, as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. They were people without a homeland, except they did have a homeland. It just wasn't here yet. And then verses 13 through 16, these all died, all these faithful people died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, were assured of them, embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland, and truly if they had called to mind that country from which they'd come out, if that was their homeland, well, they would have had opportunity to return. They could have just gone back. But now they desire a better, that is a heavenly country. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. That is their citizenship in that future city of God that is going to be here, in the kingdom that is going to fill this earth. That is the dwelling they wait for. And their journey that they made at that time was not by their own strength and power. We can especially see that with the Israelites in their 40 years of wandering. The cloud was before them, and they had this ongoing supply of manna. These were daily miracles. Every day they had these great miracles happening. And that's not all. Look over at Deuteronomy chapter 8. Deuteronomy chapter 8. We think about them trekking along for all that time. Deuteronomy 8, we read verses 2 through 10. And you, it says in Deuteronomy 8:2, and you shall remember that the Lord your God led you all the way these 40 years in the wilderness to humble you and test you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. So he humbled you, allowed you to hunger, and fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you know that man shall not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. So this word from God was more nourishing and valuable than any bread. But he was feeding them with the bread that they needed to survive, the bread from heaven. But notice verse 4 is even more amazing too. Your garments did not wear out on you, nor did your foot swell these 40 years. Their clothes stayed intact. Their feet did not swell. They were empowered. Where does the power come from to make it through the wilderness of this life? As we are led down a winding road through one difficulty after another, it comes from God. You know, Psalm 23:4 tells us, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. That is the answer. He helped the Israelites to keep putting one foot in front of the other, and their feet didn't swell through all of their walking. He empowers us to endure the trials. He bears us up as the eagle does its young in helping them to fly. Turn over to Isaiah 40. Isaiah 40. We're told here in Isaiah 40 verses 28 through 31, have you not known? Have you not heard? The everlasting God, the Lord, Yahweh, the eternal, the creator of the ends of the earth, neither faints nor is weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the weak, and to those who have no might, he increases strength. Even the youths shall faint and be weary, and the young men shall utterly fall. Everybody has a breaking point. They're all going to fall. They're all going to fall. Everybody cannot make it alone. But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. God will give us strength. We need to learn to persevere with His help. That's what the trials teach us. I'll just reference a couple verses here. Romans 5:3. You know, Paul said, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance. Tribulation produces perseverance. James 1:3. James writes, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. Patience. Patient endurance. Perseverance. These things come through the testing and the trials. But again, we're not alone. We have God's help. You know, Jesus said at the end of Matthew, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. And He will be giving that same help to His church at the end of the age. Look over Revelation 12. In Revelation 12, it's talking about the church is fleeing in this time, at the end time. Revelation 12, we'll look at verses 13 through 16. Now when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. And this here is the spiritual Israel, the church in that sense. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for times and time and half a time from the presence of the serpent. So the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. And I was talking to some people yesterday about this and was saying, I think this may well happen at the time of the days of unleavened bread. Because if you think about it, if Christ did return around the time of trumpets in the fall, then 3.5 years before that, when the church is fleeing, would be in the spring, 6 months in the year before. So it would be right at the time of the spring holy days, would be the time that the church is fleeing. And we'd have this sort of repeat on a spiritual level, this picture of the Exodus. And it says God is again bringing them on wings, 2 wings of an eagle. Now, some people say, well, that means an airplane is going to carry us. And I remember there was a guy when I was back at college, he was one of these guys preaching on the side of the road. He was saying how it means that it's not eagles, it should be egrets, and it's the egret fountain in front of the auditorium is going to fly and pick up the 4 corners of the auditorium and fly it away. And I'm like, I don't think so. I think it means eagles, except it doesn't really in literal sense. This is the same picture, brethren, that we've already seen it in Exodus and Deuteronomy, the care of God bearing his people on eagle's wings, talking about how the eagle cares for its young. God bore the Israelites on eagle's wings and brought them to him. He said, I brought you to myself. He is doing the same with us, not just in the end, right here, what we read in Revelation. He does this every day with us. And he will ultimately do so in huge, miraculous ways, like what we just read, and even finally changing us into divine beings that can literally fly into the sky to meet the returning Christ in the air. We've got to trust him in that all the way. And it's not going to get any easier, I want to let you know. Turn over to Acts 14. This life is not all the sunlit uplands. There are dark times. And we're told in Acts 14, verses 21 through 22, Paul is here saying, and when they had preached the gospel to that city and made many disciples, they returned to Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch, strengthening the souls of the disciples, exhorting them to continue in the faith, and saying, we must through many tribulations enter the kingdom of God. That is our course. So what do? We keep on, keeping on. We press on. We move forward. Turn over to Philippians 3, see what Paul wrote over there. And by the way, brethren, the Philippians were an exemplary congregation. And Paul talks about, how they refreshed him, and he was very pleased with their generosity. But they didn't have it made either, and neither did Paul himself. What was the key here? Let's look at Philippians 3, verses 12 through 16. Paul says, verse 11, if by any means I may attain to the resurrection from the dead. He's looking to that future, and he says in verse 12, not that I have already attained or am already perfected, but I press on. Press, that means to push. Jesus said, strive to enter into through the narrow gate. Strive, that word is agonizo. It's really give effort. Agonize, you do strive, push. I press on that I may lay hold of that for which Christ Jesus has also laid hold of me. Christ laid hold of him. He's laid hold of us, brethren. Our job is to press forward. Brethren, I do not count myself to have apprehended, but one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind, and reaching forward to those things which are ahead, I press toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. Therefore, let us, as many as are mature, have this mind, and if in anything you think otherwise, God will reveal even this to you. God's not done with you for anything. If you kind of get off of the track, God's going to give you what you need to be on the track. Nevertheless, verse 16, to the degree that we have already attained, let us walk by the same rule, and let us be of the same mind. We need to keep going. We need to take where we are and go forward. And how again do we do this? Well, we could look down at chapter 4, and Paul gave the key here in verse 13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That's where the power comes from. It comes from God through Jesus Christ, giving us that ability. I'm going to read a poem. I got actually 2 poems here I want to share with you. A couple of my favorite poems. This one is called Keep Going. You've seen it sometimes as Don't Quit. I just recently learned that this is actually attributed to Edgar Guest at the Detroit Free Press back in March of 1921. And we can certainly apply this to daily living, but we can apply it to our spiritual lives as well. When things go wrong, as they sometimes will, when the road you're trudging seems all uphill, when the funds are low and the debts are high, and you want to smile, but you have to sigh, when care is pressing you down a bit, rest if you must, but don't you quit. Life is queer with its twists and turns, as every one of us sometimes learns, and many a failure turns about when he might have won had he stuck it out. Don't give up, though the pace seems slow. You may succeed with another blow. Often the goal is nearer than it seems to a faint and faltering man. Often the struggler has given up when he might have captured the victor's cup. And he learned too late when the night slipped down how close he was to the golden crown. Success is failure turned inside out, the silver tint of the clouds of doubt. And you never can tell how close you are. It may be near when it seems afar. So stick to the fight when you're hardest hit. It's when things seem worst that you mustn't quit. To make it, brethren, we've got to not quit. But that means what? It means we need to keep our eyes on where we're going. We need to keep our eyes on where we're going and on the one who's leading us there. We have to have both. We have to know where we're going, and we need to keep our eyes on the one who's leading us there. The Israelites knew that they were headed to the promised land even when they were wandering about. And they had the pillar of cloud going before them. Sadly, they took their eyes off of that. They rebelled. They spoke of going back. And again, only a few actually entered the promised land, but their children were brought there. And as I mentioned, ultimately the parents will at last make it there too, in the second resurrection to come. Their life journey to reach it still being the 40 years or less, depending on when they died. You think about that. Say, how long did it take them to get to the promised land? It took 40 years. Well, wait a minute, what about the ones who died? Nope, them too. Because if they died, boom, they're going to be there when they wake up. And that is an amazing thing. In the New Testament, we are to be like the patriarchs, waiting for that future country and city, the kingdom of God and the New Jerusalem. We must keep the vision burning brightly. Look at Colossians 1. I'll turn over there. The next book here after Philippians, Colossians 1. Let's read here in verses 21 through 23. Paul's giving this encouragement to these former Gentiles. And in some ways we were like that because we were cut off from God. But and you who were once alienated and enemies in your mind by wicked works, yet now he is reconciled in the body of his flesh through death. Jesus died for all of us to present you holy and blameless and above reproach in his sight, to be unleavened, to be pure before him. If, and this is a big key, it's a big if. You would say this is a big if, and this is the if. Verse 23, if indeed you continue in the faith. Keep on. If you continue in the faith, grounded and steadfast, and are not moved away from the hope of the gospel which you heard, which was preached to every creature under heaven, of which I, Paul, became a minister. That is what we have to keep in front of us, brethren. That hope of that vision of the future, and we need to never be moved away from that. And if we're not, then we're going to be able to continue on this journey forward. That is what we all need to do. It must light our way like the pillar of cloud and fire, shining brightly through the darkness of this world. And remember the one who is in that cloud, the one that we must follow. Look over at Colossians chapter 3. Let's read verses 1 through 4. Saw this the other day. If then you were raised with Christ, And brethren, coming up out of the Red Sea was a type of baptism and being raised into new life with Christ. If then you were raised with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ is sitting at the right hand of God. That's where we need to be focused. Set your mind on things above, not on things on the earth. That doesn't mean we ignore everything, but it means our focus is before us and above to Christ. For you died, verse 3, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. And when Christ, who is our life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. Remember, Jesus said in John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He is the only way to the Father and eternity to come. Peter, remember, was focused on Christ when he said, bid me to come to you on the water. And Jesus called him, and he was empowered to walk on the water. Peter was. But it's when he took his eyes off of Christ and he looked at the waves and the stormy sea and he began to sink. But he was not left there. Jesus rescued him. And he will rescue us too, brethren, helping us to continue on our journey. Remember that Jesus has led the way before us. He went through the desert before us, both literally, when he was tempted. In that account, we read in Matthew 4 and Luke 4. And then also figuratively, going through life, going through this journey toward the kingdom. It was at Passover in the days of unleavened bread that he died and was buried for 3 days. The first 3 days and nights of unleavened bread, Jesus was in the ground. Like the Israelites at the Red Sea, it seemed all had come to an end. But it was not the end. God made a way. Jesus emerged from death and rose up out of the grave during the days of unleavened bread for a new beginning, to lead all his people through death and into new life. He was just getting started. It wasn't the end. Look at also here, I want to note we have a responsibility as we are looking up to Christ, what Paul wrote here after this. He said continuing in Colossians 3, after he said again in verse 3, for you died and your life is hidden with Christ in God, and when he appears, you will appear with him in glory. In verse 4, verse 5, therefore put to death your members which are on the earth. And he lists various sins and problems. And later he tells us what we are to put on this new life. So, as Paul elsewhere says, we die daily, leaving our old ways in the grave and walking ever forward in new life, until the day that we meet the end of this physical life, which is not the end, but a new beginning. To continue walking with Christ, to lead the rest of humanity to follow on the road. Yet this new life will be joyful beyond imagining, and it will ultimately lead to eternity with God and all those who follow the road. To the time when, as Revelation 21:4 says, there will be no more death, nor sorrow, nor pain, for the former things have passed away. And even then, it's not the end. For as he says, behold, I make all things new. To get there, we must continue to strive with God's help and never give up. Why? Because, and here's the vision aspect again, because it's all worth it. It's all worth it. Even now, we have many blessings. Life is not all dark. There is so much beauty in creation. There is the love of our children, the kindness of our brethren and friends. There are sunlit uplands on this journey, yet there are also the dark and hard times. But in the end, it will all be worth it. Turn over to 2 Corinthians. Actually, don't turn there. I'll read that from the RSV, which you may not have, but turn over to Romans 8:18. Romans 8:18. I'm going to read 2 Corinthians 4:17. This is from the Revised Standard Version. It says, for this slight momentary affliction, Paul's writing this, the guy who was beaten and left for dead, on multiple occasions. You know, he's calling it this life, this slight momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. There's nothing to compare it to. In Romans 8:18, again, another of my favorite verses, for I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. It's all going to be worth it. Brethren, this journey we're on, this race we're in, is often difficult and hard, and I know for some it is exceedingly so. But in the end, it is more than worth it. Moving to a conclusion, I want to read something that you may have heard before. It's another poem. It's called The Race, and it's attributed to D. Groberg. And I find this very inspirational, and I think you probably will too, because you can probably picture it as I read through. Quit! Give up! You're beaten! Those voices shout and plead. There's just too much against you now. This time you can't succeed. And as I start to hang my head in front of failure's face, my downward fall is broken by the memory of a race. And hope refills my weakened will as I recall that scene. For just the thought of that short race rejuvenates my being. A children's race, young boys, young men, how I remember well. Excitement sure, but also fear. It wasn't hard to tell. They all lined up so full of hope, each thought to win that race, or tie for first, or if not that, at least take second place. Their parents watched from off the side, all cheering for their son. Each boy hoped to show his folks that he would be the one. The whistle blew, and off they went, young hearts and hopes afire. To win, to be the hero there, was each young boy's desire. One boy in particular, whose dad was in the crowd, was running near the lead and thought, my dad will be so proud. But as he speeded down the field across a shallow dip, the little boy who thought to win lost his step and slipped. Trying hard to catch himself, his hands flew out to brace, and mid the laughter of the crowd, he fell flat on his face. So down he fell, and with him hope. He couldn't win it now. Embarrassed, sad, he only wished to disappear somehow. But as he fell, his dad stood up and showed his anxious face, which to the boy so clearly said, get up and win that race. He quickly rose, no damage done, behind a bit, that's all, and ran with all his mind and might to make up for his fall, so anxious to restore himself, to catch up and to win. His mind went faster than his legs. He slipped and fell again. He wished that he had quit before with only one disgrace. I'm hopeless as a runner now. I shouldn't try to race. But in the laughing crowd, he searched and found his father's face. That steady look that said again, get up and win that race. So he jumped up to try again, 10 yards behind the last. If I'm going to gain those yards, he thought, I've got to run real fast. Exceeding everything he had, he regained 8 or 10, but trying so hard to catch the lead, he slipped and fell again. Defeat. He lay there silently. A tear dropped from his eye. There's no sense running anymore. 3 strikes, I'm out. Why try? The will to rise had disappeared. All hope had fled away. So far behind, so error-prone, a loser all the way. I've lost. So what's the use, he thought. I'll live with my disgrace. But then he thought about his dad, who soon he'd have to face. Get up, an echo sounded low. Get up and take your place. You're not meant for failure here. Get up and win that race. With borrowed will, get up, it said. You haven't lost it all. For winning is not more than this, to rise each time you fall. So up he rose to run once more, and with a new commit, he resolved that win or lose, at least he wouldn't quit. So far behind the others now, the most he'd ever been. Still he gave it all he had and ran as though to win. 3 times he'd fallen stumbling, 3 times he rose again. Too far behind to hope to win, he still ran to the end. They cheered the winning runner as he crossed the line first place. Head high and proud and happy, no falling, no disgrace. But after when the fallen youngster crossed the line last place, the crowd gave him the greater cheer for finishing the race. And even though he came in last with head bowed low, unproud, you would have thought he'd won the race to listen to the crowd. And to his dad he sadly said, "I didn't do so well." "To me you won," his father said. "You rose each time you fell." And now when things seem dark and bleak and difficult to face, the memory of that little boy helps me in my own race. For all of life is like that race, with ups and downs and all. And all you have to do to win is rise each time you fall. "Quit, give up, you're beaten," they still shout in my face. But another voice within me says, "Get up and win that race." I'd like you to look at Philippians 1:6, brethren. This is my wife's favorite scripture. And it's a very tremendous verse because of what it means ultimately. Philippians 1, and Paul is talking to this congregation here, and notice what he says: "Being confident of this very thing, that he who has begun a good work in you will complete it until the day of Jesus Christ." He's going to finish that work. We just have to stay in the process. We just have to stay in it with God, to not quit, to get up and win that race. If we do that, we will make it. And I want to end by playing a wonderful song from Christian radio that gives us encouragement to keep on keeping on. And we'll stop the recording in just a moment for copyright reasons, but for those of you listening to this later, you can find the song on YouTube as a fitting ending to this message. It's titled "Weary Traveler" by Jordan St. Cyr. Brethren, I know that life can be hard, and it sometimes seems like the end is so far. We can become so weary as we continue on this journey down this desert road. We're tired, we ache, we bear heavy burdens. We fall down. We struggle to keep going. We sometimes wonder if we'll be able to endure. We will, brethren. We will make it. We will make it home to the promised land of God's kingdom. Wait upon the Lord, and your strength will be renewed. You will mount up with wings like eagles. You will run and not be weary. You will walk and not faint. And you're never alone. There will be more trials, but God will see you through. And your trials will soon be over. Just hold on. Hang in there with God and all your fellow travelers on this desert road. Keep pressing forward and carry on.